Once you record the chief complaint and history of present illness, it is very important next to record the medical history. As given in your END form, all the areas of all the checklist that is provided is very, very important in order to verify and ask the patient all these things and make sure that they give the proper answers to them and proper findings to you. It is important sometimes because if at all a patient comes to you and you ask the patient that whether you have any medical problems before, then the patient may say no. Sometimes no is different from they don't know, right? Perhaps you should always ask in cases where they say no, I don't have any medical problems. You please try to ask them like one more question and see whether they have underwent any relevant or recent medical checkup, and if so, when it is. So if at all the medical checkup has not been done at any of previous 2-3 years or something, then at least in past few years, that means that they have not probably under regular medical checkup and they not have been diagnosed of any further underlying medical problems. So no is totally different from it's not revealed or it's not known or it's not diagnosed yet. So please ask the patient when was the recent medical checkup done, or whether they have gone for any medical checkup and then the doctor said there is no medical problem. That is totally different. Then we are clear that of course there are no abnormalities. But if at all they don't know, then probably they may need one more checkup, or you suspect of something, then you can go along with investigations in that direction, or you may refer to the physician. So especially coming to the periodontal disease, presence of diabetes, presence of a pregnancy, presence of medication, patient taking medication may also have an influence on an impact on getting the gingival enlargement or getting exacerbation of the existing disease in different ways. So it is very important to capture the medical history properly and relevantly. As shown in these pictures, you can see here the picture of enlargement that has been induced due to the use of cyclosporine, which is an immunosuppressive drug that has been used in a patient who is on transplants. Okay, and here also you can see a patient who have got leukemia, and then leukemia causing gingival enlargement. So all these things are not due to actually the gum status or the gingival problem. It's not periodontal disease per se, but it is due to the underlying medical history or the medical problem that is manifesting in the gingiva. So it is important to please verify in all the patients that whether they are under the care of any physician at the present time. Sometimes they say they are on diabetes, but they stopped medication quite some time, or they're not continuing the medication, any of them, even hypertension, but because it is normal right now, I'm not using medication. So it is important whether they stopped it on their own or whether they have a supervision under any other referral doctors. Now, any hospitalization history, any infections, any anesthesia, allergies, and any hemorrhagic episodes, all these things have to be noted down also. As I said, medication and history of allergies also is very, very important for us to prescribe what to prescribe and what not to prescribe in particular patient. And onset of hormonal diseases especially have an influence on gum and the gingival and periodontium, right? So any patient, depending upon the patient age, or if it is a male or female, you may have to verify sometimes whether there is onset of puberty, whether the patient is pregnant, or whether she's a menopausal woman. So accordingly, certain clues may help you in order to identify the underlying factor that is causing the present problem. And also, as I said, when is the last medical checkup done, and any reports if available, please do look into it and document it properly before you proceed with the further examination. Coming to dental history, of course, most of the dental history findings will be very, very relevant. However, for periodontal examination point of view, dental history of what duration they have taken, what kind of treatment they have taken, whether they have undergone any orthodontic treatment, when the treatment was terminated, were there any episodes of enlargement or infection in between, whether any episodes of pain in the teeth or gums, any history of any further or before periodontal problems that have been addressed or treatment has been done. Important question which most of you usually avoid asking or omit asking is history of extractions. Especially, it's not how many teeth that have been lost, but the reason for the loss of teeth. That is very, very important question. According to the new classification, To diagnose a patient properly, it is important to understand how many teeth are lost and what is the reason for the loss of teeth. Is it a periodontal reason, which means mobile teeth, or is it because of the caries and grossly decayed and therefore it got extracted, or any trauma or other reasons? So please ask if the patient complains of, or if patient presents with multiple loss of teeth, do not forget to ask the reason for the loss of teeth. Okay, and this plays a very important thing. As you can see, as I said, here the patient who is undergoing braces, you can see in the picture there is gingival enlargement that is happening, okay, because of the improper plaque maintenance or because of the extra plaque retentive factors. Now, when it comes to family history, I know most of you we usually ask about whether they have diabetes or hypertension or maybe bleeding disorders. But other important thing that is most important for periodontal disease is periodontal disease also runs in families. It could be due to some inheritance in the family. So please verify whether the patient has got anybody in the family who have got early loss of teeth. They may not know if you ask them whether they have got periodontitis, right? So you can ask them like whether anybody, mother or father or any other siblings, have got early loss of teeth, multiple loss of teeth, or whether they are using any dentures in the early age around 45 or 50, something like that. So this can clue us, okay, this could be something in the family which is also causing in this particular patient who presented to you. So personal history, when it comes to the personal history, of course, smoking is a very known established risk factor for periodontal disease. It's not only whether the patient is smoking or not, but how many cigarettes he's smoking per day, and since how long he's been smoking is also very important to find out. If at all the patient has been a past smoker, currently not smoking, you also find out when he stopped smoking and how long, or for example, he started smoking from 20 years to 40 years and now he is 55 years. So since last 15 years, he's not a smoker, or not a smoker, but he was a former smoker for so 20 years of time. So these things are actually may helpful for proper establishing the risk factors in the particular patient. So any further drug use on a regular basis, what is of course personal habits of oral hygiene maintenance are very important. They make a major role in maintenance of plaque, right? So personal history also includes how they take care of their oral hygiene maintenance to be included. As you can see in your E&D form, under personal history and habits, of course, you all will ask about the toothbrushing or frequency. You follow the checklist and you verify all these things. But under the habits, apart from bruxism is very important because occlusion can also have its influence on periodontal disease. It can cause angular bone loss, tooth mobility, and other factors. So, and sensitivity, of course. So, you will ask, of course, about the bruxism as it is mentioned, but don't forget to ask some more habits which will be mentioned now in the following slides. For instance, you also need to verify if the patient has any mouth breathing. Mouth breathing is probably the patient may not say it is a habit. It is something you need to verify. You need to check whether the patient lips are competent, whether usually they are able to breathe when you are present, when the patient you are examining, whether the patient is breathing from the mouth, whether the lips are competent, whether he is breathing from nose or not. Then you can also ask the patient, usually do you sleep with open mouth or do you breathe from the mouth, and all these things. These things can also clue us for mouth breathing. Why mouth breathing? Because there are certain gingival changes that are associated with mouth breathing, such as erythema of the maxillary anterior regions. There could be edema, there could be enlargement, sometimes there could be diffuse surface to the exposed areas also may become very peeling off, also can be seen of the epithelium. So this particular changes is due to dryness and associated with the mouth breathing. So hence mouth breathing is also something to be checked properly and assessed properly in the patient. Another interesting finding which you need to examine in the patients is what causes actually this kind of protruding teeth in adults. In children, of course, if they have protruding teeth or forwardly placed teeth, the parents will be concerned and they will be trying to go for a orthodontic treatment to adjust their braces because of the teeth alignment may be improper, we think. But what about this lady? This lady definitely is an aged woman, right? So in this patient, you see there is a lot of spacing between the teeth and the teeth look flared in between, right? The teeth are all flared. So what could be the reason at that particular age the teeth becoming flared up? So this is also one of the important thing which you need to notice, and you have to assess properly also. So this could be, the reason could be periodontitis, the reason could be pathological migration, the reason could be some habits. So what habit can lead to exacerbating this kind of spacing? Let us look into it. Yes, the reason could be tongue thrusting. Tongue thrusting, how do you check in a patient? You hold the lips apart like this in the patient and you ask the patient to swallow, right? When the patient swallow, you ask them, okay, you swallow first, and you don't open your mouth, but you can separate the lips, open up and check where is the position of the tongue. When you check the position of the tongue, and if the position of the tongue is in between the teeth or touching the lower anteriors, or then it is not in a proper position, then it can be classified as a tongue thrusting habit. Okay, then you can verify the, if you have observed that, then you may verify the, ask the patient to double check where are you placing your tongue while you are closing the while you are swallowing. Then the patient will observe, you ask them to observe first and then let you know. Then they will realize that yes, my tongue is at this particular area, they will tell you. The ideal position for proper swallowing is usually the tongue has to be on the most anterior part of the palate behind the upper incisors like this. So usually there is no show of the tongue whenever there is a proper swallowing. The tongue should not be pushing the lower anterior teeth, or the tongue should not be in between the teeth, especially when in the case of open bite you can see those things. What happens because of tongue thrusting? Because of the tongue thrusting, for example, in already a periodontally compromised patient like what you see here, the lower anteriors, if this patient particularly probably has a tongue thrusting habit, then the spacing, the pathological migration, which already is due to the teeth are already weak, there is already no bone support, so the teeth probably are slightly mobile and they are weak support. So this tongue thrusting force can actually cause more flaring of the teeth, more spacing between the teeth. Even the mobility may also exacerbate. So this has to be recognized early and has to be corrected possibly. Sometimes the spacing can be misleaded to diagnosis of periodontitis even though there is no periodontitis. Okay, so actual diagnosis depends on whether there is tongue thrusting habit or whether there is a periodontal disease. So this has to be ruled out. The next important thing after we finish the personal history and all is the extraoral examination. Of course, everything about extraoral examination is important. If at all any obvious finding, like of course you check for the site of complaint. If at all any site of patient has any site of complaint, you check on that area whether there is swelling present, whether there is any scars, whether there is any asymmetry present, and all these things. You will check for the face, you check for the lips, right? You check for any ulcers, any breaches, all these things which are regularly taught to you how to do the ENT, everything is taught. But for periodontal point of view, what is important is not only these things, but check whether the patient is obese, check whether the patient build, height, weight and all, have to you pay an attention towards it, because obesity may have, metabolic syndrome may have certain implications on periodontal disease. And in research it is actually well established. Most of the papers have pointed to this particular metabolic syndrome or obesity causing a risk factor towards a periodontal disease. However, it is not completely established in clinical practice yet. Also, the lymph nodes, if at all any tender lymph nodes are present, whether they are palpable or mobile, it has to be noted. In which situations of periodontitis usually we observe lymphadenopathy? Either it should be very acute condition or an abscess. What is acute condition? Mostly we see it could be pericoronitis, it could be periodontal abscess, it could be endoperiod lesions with pain, or it could be UNUG. Most of the times these are the problems usually which end up in having acute phase of infection. So all these things you need to note down. Now comes the most important, that is the intraoral examination. Now what are we looking at? What periodontal assessment I'm actually going to teach you starts from the intraoral examination. Of course, for coming to the periodontal point of view, the intraoral examination includes all the points that are given here in the checklist: labial mucosa, tongue, floor of the mouth, buccal mucosa, palate and others. Apart from that, there are certain more information you need to record, as of course malodor if it is present, oral hygiene if it is present. What do you look for when you want to see whether the patient has got any mucogingival problems, or how is the attached gingiva, how is the frenum? All these things have to be carefully assessed. not only for the presence of ulcers, not only for the presence of the erythema or swellings, but you need to assess for their the mucogingival problems, which we will discuss hereafter. As I have highlighted here, the intraoral examination findings must include the basic periodontal examination, gingival examination, examination of the periodontium, and mucogingival problems. These are the four important entities to be examined. Apart from that, in the hard tissue examination that are more relevant to perio include occlusion or presence of trauma from occlusion, and any hypersensitivity or any proximal contacts, loss of proximal contacts, which can lead to food impaction and thereby pocket formation, any pathological migration. So these are the most important relevant findings we need to record from periodontal disease perspective. Let us start with the examination of the gingiva. Examination of the gingiva, it is not being taught to you for the first time. It has been already taught to you so thoroughly in year 3. So I will go not so detailed in examination of gingiva, but I will run through what are the important points to be observed and examined in the patient. I hope you all by this time have already got the grip of writing the gingival examination findings. Okay, let us look into it. As I said, the first examination of soft tissue includes gingival examination, under which you will have to record what is the appearance of the gingiva, whether the presence of the color is normal, healthy, gingival normal color could be pinkish in color, or it is pigmented, or is there any vascularity that has caused any changes in the erythema, or is there because of that any white gingival appearance present, any pale red appearance or reddish pink or bright red color. All these things could be possible. So note down whether the erythema, whatever you are observing, or the change in the color you are observing, whether it is localized or it is to specific sites or it is generalized. So these things has to be noted down. Similarly, for the size of the gingiva, you will see whether there is any enlargement, any swelling, whether it is localized, whether it is restricted to papilla or marginal gingiva, or it is a diffused enlargement, or it is a localized discrete swelling that is present. So what are the reasons for these? It could be inflammation, it could be any hyperplasia. So all these things, whether the swelling is edematous or it is fibrotic. So these things have to be noted down and has to be recorded accordingly. Contour of the gingiva is also very important. For the contour of the gingiva, you will actually record whether there is the proper U-shaped scalloping or the V-shaped scalloping of the gingiva is present or not, and there is a knife edge margins. The margins usually have to be, you see in this picture, the margins are not knife edge, right? They are blunt, and there was also actually a slight rolled margins are present. But here, normally in a healthy gingiva, you will see a knife edged margins. So whether the configuration is lost, it indicates a sign of inflammation or it indicates a sign of disease. So those things have to be noted down. Consistency. Normally we all know the gingival consistency is very firm and resilient because it is tightly adherent to the underlying periosteum and the bone. So the factors normally determine whether the gingival consistency is fluctuant or soft or edematous. All these, it all depends upon the collagenous nature of the lamina propria. It also depends on its attachment to the mucoperiosteum and also the presence of the fibers. If the fibers are intact, then the gingival consistency will be very firm. But if the fibers are broken down, as in the case of disease or inflammation, then the gingiva becomes very soggy and puffy, flaccid, right? It doesn't have the tenacious nature anymore. So in gingiva, it is usually the soggy puffiness could be observed, or it could be sometimes a long-standing inflammation could have even a fibrosis also, which would be in firm and leathery consistency. See, observe the consistency is not something you observe, but this one has to be palpated, and you have to palpate and observe it, how it looks like, how you have to feel it, how it looks like. Surface texture. Surface texture, usually most of the students, even when you are in year 3, I'm repeating because year 3 you might not, your batch of students might not have got good enough exposure in the clinical cases. So I'm just running through these gingival findings again. So surface texture, as you all know, the gingival surface texture should have a stippling. Stippling is a normal healthy pattern that is usually present. How do you check for stippling? Most of the students under my supervision last time used to check for stippling using a dry syringe. I won't say it is a wrong thing, but drying doesn't mean that you can see only by air drying. Sometimes you should take a piece of a cotton roll or something, and then run around the gingival margin. Then you will observe the gingiva gets dried up. You can see that the dot appearance, which is actually due to the alternating rounded protuberances and depressions in the of the lamina propria into the retipex. That is what clinically observed as a stippling, right? So it is a normal variant, normal observation pattern. It is not any abnormality. Stippling should be present if it is healthy, but in the presence of gingival inflammation or disease, stippling is lost. Okay, so this can be noted down also. Any exudation, any bleeding on probing can also be noted down under gingival findings. Under the mucogingival examination, few of the findings like presence of width of attached gingiva and gingival recession, what type of frenum is present, whether the vestibule depth is adequate or not, these things can be observed under soft tissue examination while you are doing your regular intraoral examination also. Now let us go in detail how to evaluate these particular findings while you are doing the intraoral examination. Now let us look into the examination of various mucogingival problems. Mucogingival problems are also associated with periodontal disease. They can result in periodontal problems or manifestations, but however, these are not due to infection. Mucogingival problems itself is a separate topic to you in year 4 that will be discussed in 2-3 hours later, at the end of the year 4. But however, here we need to see whether the patient has got any of such mucogingival problem. If yes or no, how do you check and what examination you need to perform in order to identify that the patient has got a problem. This is the only scope of in this particular lecture. How the problem can be treated, what will happen if there is a mucogingival problem, how it can be rectified, that all will be discussed on a separate topic. So here I am going to teach you what are the possible mucogingival problems and what you should examine in a patient. Okay, now generally the mucogingival problems are, as I said, is not due to any infection. It is due to any variant. It's not due to biofilm. It is not caused due to bacteria. It is majorly because of the anatomical variants that are presenting in the patient. Like for example, how much of attached gingiva, width of attached gingiva the patient has, what type of frenum the patient has, whether the vestibule is shallow or deep, whether there is recession present or not. Gingival recession is an entity where it can happen due to the mucogingival problem, or it can also happen due to periodontal disease. So assessment of gingival recession I will be covering in detail in part 2 of this lecture. Now other mucogingival problems that can also happen include gingival pigmentation or voilage. Like you see here, the patient may not be so happy if it's in a female patient, like a dark color pigmentation. So the patient may ask you a correction. The patient may also have present a problem with violation of biologic when there is a restorative procedure that has been done. Or you can see here black triangles, as you can observe in this picture, the presence of black triangles due to the papillary loss or recession of the papilla, right? This can also give an anesthetic appearance. Gingival biotype. Now what is gingival biotype? Gingival biotype is presence of thick gingiva or a thin gingiva. Okay, so if the patient has got very thick gingiva with a square type of teeth, usually it is called thickness of gingiva is good, then usually the patient won't have recession, rather they may have pockets if there is an infection, periodontitis. But in case if the patient has got a very thin gingiva, as you see here in this case, then there is a high chance of getting a gingival recession, because the thickness of gingiva is not so strong, it will yield faster to the gingival recession. See, observing all these things will come under mucogingival examination. So let us look into each one. For the assessment of width of the attached gingiva, before we go how to assess the width of attached gingiva, I'll just give you a quick recap of what is attached gingiva. Attached gingiva, as you know, this, if you observe, this is the cross section of the gingiva. You can see that this is the marginal gingiva, and this part is observed as the attached gingiva. Okay, you can see here, from here, which is usually presented as a free gingival groove. Okay, from the free base of the gingiva sulcus to the mucogingival junction. This is a mucogingival junction. Okay, so because beyond the mucogingival junction, what you see is all the alveolar mucosa. right? So from the mucogingival junction to the base of the gingival sulcus, but base of the gingival sulcus you can't see outside. You should probe and then only you will see the sulcus base, correct? So you have to measure the sulcus depth first, and then you will actually measure the tip of the gingival margin until the mucogingival junction. So if you take two parameter measurements, one you measure from the gingival margin. Here you can see here in the second picture, here in the picture they are observing from the gingival margin until this is the mucogingival junction, right? Here whatever is the depth they'll take a measurement, right? After that you will have to actually probe into the sulcus and you note down the depth of the sulcus. Because the depth of the sulcus you can't see outside, you subtract the depth of the sulcus from the total distance of the gingival margin to the mucogingival junction. That will give you actually the presence of width of attached gingiva, which we want only from here to here. So this is the width of the attached gingiva. So this part is called attached gingiva, and the total with the attached gingiva plus marginal gingiva or free gingiva together is called as keratinized gingiva. So here actually what is being measured? Here actually the keratinized gingiva is being measured. Minus or subtract the sulcus depth will give you the width of the attached gingiva. I hope it is clear to you. So you measure the total width of the gingiva, which is from gingival margin to mucogingival line, which is nothing but the keratinized gingiva, and subtract the sulcus depth. In case if pocket there, okay, pocket depth, and then you will get the width of the attached gingiva. Okay, so this is a very important measurement which you need to also take, because there could be a lot of problems which can happen if there is insufficient width of attached gingiva, especially it can lead to gingival recession. So it is important you need take down when you write the intraoral examination for periodontal patient, then you please note down width of attached gingiva looks inadequate or the measurement is so much, so it is inadequate. If it is let us see how to write it in a record. Why it is important to record the width of attached gingiva? You may have a question. It is important because width of attached gingiva has got a lot of functions. The attached gingiva itself actually it prevents the spread of the inflammation into the tissues further down. It also deflects food away from the gingival margins, such that the food does not have any accumulated, it doesn't accumulate into the gingival sulcus. It braces the gingiva firmly against the teeth. It acts as a buffer between the movable mucosa and also the free gingiva. It bears the compressive and the shear forces during the mastication, and also most importantly transmission of the frenal pull. There is frenum attachment which I will cover in the next slide. The frenum pull also is actually prevented by the width of the attached gingiva. So if at all the attached gingiva is continuous with the marginal gingiva and tightly bound to the underlying bone, then it is actually good enough that it prevents to extend the pocket and resist the occlusal forces as well. And usually the width of attached gingiva is very greater in the incisor, maxillary incisor region, and it is usually least in the premolar region. So these are all the methods to record the keratinized gingiva or width of attached gingiva. There are various measurements. The first one is the visual measurement using a probe. Just now I told you to measure using the entire keratinized gingiva you measure, then you measure the sulcus depth, then you subtract. That will give you the width of attached gingiva. That is first method. Okay. The second method is the tension test. Then the roll test, and also histochemical staining using Lugol's iodine. Lugol's iodine is a chemical which will actually stain the alveolar mucosa. It does not stain the attached gingiva. This is very, very important point. Students usually get confused because I say that usually we teach them that the Lugol's iodine can be used to measure the width of attached gingiva. So they think that the Lugol's iodine will actually stain the attached gingiva, but no. Lugol's iodine will actually stain the alveolar mucosa due to the glycogen presence. So see, if you see the Lugol, once the Lugol's iodine is applied into the patient, the alveolar mucosa, see, this is all the alveolar mucogingival junction I am drawing here. So above all is the alveolar mucosa. This is all the shaded area is all the alveolar mucosa which got stained, right? So once, what is the advantage to stain the alveolar mucosa or the mucogingival junction? Then you know very clearly from here to here is the keratinized gingiva, right? So it is easy for you to demarcate the alveolar mucosal junction, the mucogingival junction, and therefore you can easily measure how much of width of attached gingiva is present. That is using the histochemical staining. Right. Now, how to measure the width of attached gingiva? Using tension test and roll test. Let us see. Okay, now what is tension test? Tension test, for example, if you want to check the tension test in lower lip, you need to stretch out the lip outward and downward, and you need to like this, right? And you need to pull the lip. Okay, once you are pulling the lip, and you can also probe the sulcus, then you will see if the movement of the lip causes or induces any movement of the free marginal gingiva. For example, you can see here the lip is being stretched. Okay, once the lip is being stretched here, if at all, do you observe any movement of the papilla or the marginal gingiva in this area have to be verified. So if at all you observe any movement, that means the attached gingiva is inadequate. If at all the attached gingiva, as you see here, this is the mucogingival junction. It's clearly seen, this is all the alveolar mucosa. So this is the mucogingival junction, and there is no much attached gingiva. There is directly the marginal gingiva. So now since there is no attached gingiva present, there is no barrier that prevents the frenum pull or the lip pull to extend until the free gingiva, right? So all the frenum will be pulled, the gingiva or the lip pull can also easily be transmitted into the marginal gingiva. This can also lead to sulcus opening. It can also lead to the more and more plaque accumulation underneath the gum, or it can lead to subgingival plaque accumulation, food deposition, all these problems. It can also, since the barrier is not there, which is very adherent, attached gingiva is very tightly adherent tissue, very firm to the underlying mucoperiosteum. So since that particular tissue is inadequate in this situation, therefore it can also lead to easy recession. If there is any infection, there could lead to easy recession or easy progression of the pocket into the alveolar mucosa. So these problems can be avoided if there is adequate amount of attached gingiva. So when you perform the tension test in a patient, you please check whether there is any movement of the papilla or the gingiva, marginal gingiva. If there is a movement, then we understand the amount of attached gingiva is inadequate. If it is no movement, you can identify that means probably there is enough or adequate amount of attached gingiva. Now, in mathematical terms, how you may ask me how much of attached gingiva is considered adequate. A lot of papers have been reported in this direction. So they have all studied and said that few papers by Lang and Low have reported that 2 mm of attached gingiva could actually is what is required to prevent the recession or to have enough barrier effect. But ultimately later it was proved that it is not, because there are patients who have got less amount of attached gingiva but they are healthy, and there are also patients who have got more amount of attached gingiva but they have got a lot of other problems. So they have ultimately concluded that it is not how much that is important, it is whether it is adequate in that particular patient to whatever oral hygiene protocol or procedures he is using. So you need to just record whether attached gingiva is adequate or it is inadequate. So based upon the test we have, we can if it is usually considered, if it is more than 2 mm, we can say it is more or less adequate. Okay. Now, so tension is applied to the lip in outward and upward direction, downward and upward direction, depending upper or lower lip, and also in lateral directions. Gingival margin is actually observed, and any movement of the free gingiva, if it is recorded, then it is representing a positive response to the tension test. Thereby, the attached gingiva is considered inadequate. Okay. Yeah. Now let us see what is roll test. Roll test is also can be done in order to rule out the presence of whether the attached gingiva is adequate or not. And for doing the roll test, actually you need to take a periodontal probe or a dull instrument and put the probe in this fashion, like this, in this direction on the alveolar mucosa, the mucogingival junction. So it is done by pushing the adjacent non-attached alveolar mucosa and coronally towards the attached gingiva. So you place the instrument there in the horizontal fashion, and you from the start put the probe at the alveolar mucosa and pull the instrument along with the direction towards the direction of the attached gingiva. Now, if this movement is, if it induces this movement of the probe, it induces any movement of the gingival margin coronally, then we can say there is a also attached gingiva inadequate, or if at all the probe is sliding on to the marginal gingiva until the marginal gingiva, that means there is no enough adequate attached gingiva. If the probe stops at the attached gingiva, that means there is still enough attached gingiva which will stop the movement of the probe going beyond the attached gingiva until the free gingival margin or the papilla. So using the roll test also we can say, or we can check clinically whether the patient has got enough attached gingiva or not. So finally we have these 4 tests. One is a roll test, tension test, or you can directly measure whether it is 2 mm or beyond by measuring it, or using the histochemical Lugol's iodine staining. So the video links for the attached the roll test and for the tension test you can watch online how to perform. Actually, I have taken a video and it is posted to you as well. Frenum. So to assess the type of frenum attachment, let us see what is a frenum. First, frenum is nothing but a fold of mucous membrane with enclosed muscle fibers in it, and is attached to the lips or the cheeks, and it's also attached to mucosa or the gingiva and the underlying periosteum also. So the various types of frenal attachment that are possible include mucosal frenum, gingival frenum, papillary and papillary penetrating. These are the 4 types of frenal attachments usually we can observe in a any kind of patients usually. So let us see what each type of frenum and how it looks. So as I said, here you can see the pictures, the high frenum attachment. If at all there is mucosal or gingival frenum, it is normal, or it is considered as normal frenum. It is not considered, or it is low frenum attachment we may say. But if at all there is a papillary frenum or a papillary penetrating frenum, both these kinds of frenum are considered as high frenal attachments. That means if you observe in the maxillary area, if at all the frenum is attached in the papillary here, or if it is attached papillary penetrating, that means it is attached into the palatal surface of the papilla in between the space of the tooth. It goes between the diastema, it goes and attaches palatally the frenum. That those kind of frenum are called as papillary penetrating type of frenum. So this assessment, if at all there is papillary or papillary penetrating type of frenum, then as I said, these are called as high frenal attachments. And the importance of high frenal attachments, why we assess, is because high frenal attachments can lead to recession, can lead to plaque formation, can lead to foot impaction and other problems. It can also cause diastema, it can also interfere with orthodontic treatment. A lot of other issues can happen. Even in your dentures also you need to relieve high frenum, right? So all these are the problems that are associated in case depending upon the type of frenum. So if at all the frenum is attached up to the mucogingival junction, we call it as either alveolar mucosa or mucogingival junction, we call it as mucosal frenum. If at all if the frenum is attached to attached gingiva, then we call it as a gingival frenum. Okay, let me show you some other pictures also. Here if you can observe, the frenum is actually attached to the facial surface of the mandibular incisor here. Okay, this is also a kind of high frenal attachment, and here you can see it is almost attached to the marginal gingiva. So this pull of the frenum in this situation can also be one of the contributing factor for causing the recession in the lower anterior teeth. As explained, this is an example of a mucosal frenum. Very attachment is present at a very low level. It is at the mucogingival junction or below. Here it is attached to the attached gingiva, so it is called a gingival frenum. Here it is a papilla, it is attached to the papilla, so it is called a papillary frenum. And as I said, in the diastema cases, usually whenever there is a papillary penetrating type of frenum, there will be definitely a interdental space between that, because the muscle it goes in between the 2 teeth, and therefore the 2 teeth cannot be approximated well. So usually there will be some space present. So this kind of frenum, where the frenum is going in between the teeth and it attaches to the papilla on the palatal surface, is what is called as papillary penetrating type of frenum. Now let us look into the how you assess the depth of the vestibule. So usually we know the vestibule is measured. It is also an important landmark to be measured usually, because vestibule, especially whenever you are doing your denture cases, the shallow vestibule can cause a lot retention problems, and also can lead to some of the restorative problems if at all the vestibule is very low. So shallow vestibule, or how you actually measure the vestibule, what are the borders of a vestibule, from where to where we actually measure. The lower limit of the vestibule is, we know that the lower limit of the vestibule is nothing but the point of the greatest concavity of the mucobuccal fold. So wherever you find the point of greatest concavity in the mucobuccal fold, this will be the lower limit of the vestibule. Coming to the upper limit of the vestibule, it is a bit difficult to establish. Usually there are different areas, different ways depending upon type of patient. So the upper, sometimes it is taken as a gingival margin. It can be taken like this, a gingival margin, as the upper limit to measure the vestibule, or it can be also taken as the incisor. Sorry, in this picture you can't see, but the incisor margin of the incisor edge of the tooth can also be taken as the upper limit to measure the vestibule depth. And in few cases it can be also taken as the crest of the lip, not this side but the lip, on the outer surface of the lip, to the greatest concavity of the mucobuccal fold. That also can be taken as the upper limit to measure the depth of the vestibule. So usually mucogingival junction also usually is taken sometimes, mucogingival junction to here, because mucogingival junction is usually a standard landmark. All right. So if at all the patient is edentulous, of course it is obvious that they always consider the crest of the residual alveolar ridge to the concavity, the greatest concavity of the fornix of the buccal vestibule. That can be measured as the vestibule depth. All right. So depending upon either of these things usually is considered in order to decide whether the depth of the vestibule is shallow or deep. Again, to understand what is the significance of assessment of vestibule, why it is important to check whether the vestibule is deep or shallow, it is because if at all the vestibule depth is not deep enough, then it can cause compromised maintenance of putting your brush properly and cleaning in the area. It can cause compromised oral hygiene measures, because if at all the depth of the vestibule is not enough, as shown in the previous picture, the brush don't have enough space to be positioned properly, and therefore the oral hygiene, whenever the people in whom the vestibule depth is actually very shallow, while brushing their teeth, there is every chance they can cause actually an injury to their gingiva or the soft tissues over there. So they may not perform a very good oral hygiene in that zone. Right. Also, even for the proper placement of the retention of the removable prosthesis is important. You all know that. And minimal attached gingiva with adequate vestibular depth. If at all, in some patients, usually shallow vestibule can also be along with the the minimal or inadequate attached gingiva. But it can be anything. Sometimes the vestibule depth can be deeper, but the attached gingiva can be small or inadequate. So if at all the adequate depth of the vestibule is adequate but attached gingiva is inadequate, then it's still okay as long as the vestibular depth is enough. Even though the attached gingiva is less, it is okay. It doesn't require any correction or any technical correction required. But if at all vestibular depth is also shallow and attached gingiva is also not enough or inadequate, in that situations, most of the times, especially when you are going for restorative procedures or even for the to prevent the periodontal problems, it is probably advocated to go for a correction depending upon the patient signs. Okay, so importantly, if at all, it all not only depends upon the vestibule depth, but also how much of attached gingiva. Both the things have to be considered, whether the correction is required or not. Now let us look into how to assess the oral hygiene in the patient. We have so far completed the assessment or examination of gingiva. We have done with the mucogingival problems, and now let us look into how to verify the presence of the good or bad oral hygiene in the patient. As it comes here, after you go with gingival and examination intraorally, you have to examine the oral hygiene of the patient, which is a very major contributing factor for periodontal disease. So let us look into what are the various indices we use in order to estimate the oral hygiene in a patient. When we are assessing the oral hygiene, it includes assessment of plaque score, I'll be teaching you both O'Leary plaque index and Sillness and Low plaque index, both of which are important for you to apply in your clinical practice later on. And bleeding score, which I will be teaching you for Mulleyman's bleeding index, and also how to assess the full mouth bleeding score. Also calculus index. So all these, with the help of all three, knowledge of all the three index, one is plaque score, bleeding score and calculus index, you will be able to judge whether the patient's oral hygiene is really maintenance is good or not really up to the mark. Okay. Now, first one is the Sillness and Low plaque index, which was given in 1964. This index measures the thickness of the plaque on the gingival 1/3 of the teeth usually, and it has got good validity and reliability. But the major drawback of this index, you understand that it all depends upon the subjectivity. Subjectivity means, for example, the three people who are doing a plaque score, I may say the plaque score is 1, you may say the plaque score is 2. So because it depends on how I perceive and it depends upon how you perceive. So this subjectivity could lead to some differences in the final scoring. So that's what is, but otherwise the scoring is simple and it can be easily applied. Another advantage of this Sillness and Low plaque index, why I am also teaching you, is because you really no need to disclose the plaque, right? We have plaque disclosing solutions or plaque disclosing agents. So you can use usually the plaque disclosing agents in order to stain the plaque first, so that you can differentiate what is plaque, and then only you will be able to use other plaque indices. But for Sillness and Low plaque index, you don't really require to disclose the plaque. You don't need to have disclosing solutions or disclosing agents. Okay, so depending upon the teeth you are selected, these are the index teeth on which you will actually verify the presence of plaque or not. These are called index teeth, but it can also be done for the full mouth. Now, the areas that has to be examined include distofacial, facial, mesiofacial and the lingual surface of the tooth. I will clearly explain in the further slides what are the three surfaces or the four surfaces which we need to examine for the plaque index. Now, this the Sillness and Low plaque index, the scoring criteria include 0, 1, 2 and 3. 0 means there is absolutely no plaque, and 1 includes this thin layer of the plaque at the gingival margin, and this is only detectable by scraping with a probe. You can use any periodontal probe and you try to scrape the tooth margin. So while you are scraping the tooth margin, only then you feel there is some plaque. Otherwise, with the naked eye, you are not able to, we cannot not differentiate whether there is a presence of plaque or not. In that situation, you usually give a score of 1. Now, 2 is a moderate layer of plaque along the gingival margin, interdental spaces, but plaque is visible to the naked eye. In this situation, not only with the probe, but it is actually visible even to the naked eye. So in that situation, you can also give a score of 2. Now, abundant plaque along the gingival margin, interdental spaces or filled with plaque. So you see the abundance of the plaque, which is very obvious. Then you will give a score of 3. So where you will measure these indices, this scoring can be given on 4 surfaces, as I mentioned. On, for example, this is the tooth, you will do on the facial surface, on the mesiobuccal, midbuccal, and the this is mesiobuccal and the midbuccal, and as well as the distobuccal surface of the tooth, and lingually only one area, that is midlingual surface. So altogether, you have to measure the plaque on the 4 surfaces. Now, based upon the scoring criteria of 0, 1, 2, 3, the total plaque index for an individual can be estimated by summing up all the scores and dividing by the number of teeth that are examined, by number of teeth into 4 times 4, because you are examining 4 surfaces in each tooth, right? So 4 into number of teeth present will be a denominator, by sum of all the scores, the sigma total sum of the scores will be your numerator. So this will be actually the calculation estimation of your Sillness and plaque score. So once you get the score, accordingly to the inference will be given whether the patient has got good, excellent or fair or poor oral hygiene based upon this inference criteria. If your value of this is 0, then it is an excellent oral hygiene if the patient. If the value is 1 to 0.1 to 0.9 is considered good. Anything 1 to 1.9 is fair, poor if it is 2 to 3. Any value between 2 to 3 is considered a patient has got a poor oral hygiene. Okay, so I will show you an example how to estimate in the next slide. So the calculation of plaque index goes like this. Each of the two surface is estimated on the buccal, lingual, mesial, distal surfaces and is given a score from 0 to 3. For example, the buccal surface has got all the scores, the lingual score 1, mesial score 1, distally 2 and buccally is 2. So sum of the score is all the scores by total number of surfaces on that particular tooth is 4. So by 4. So 1.5. So score will be 2. The inference value will be anything in between 0.1 to 1.9 is considered as score 2. So accordingly, you actually, this is for one tooth. When you want to calculate for the full mouth, you have to sum up all the scores by 4 into the number of teeth present. This gives you a plaque index. Okay. Now let us look into O'Leary plaque index. O'Leary plaque index, advantage of O'Leary plaque index is much easier because there is no subjectivity. Because here usually the plaque is stained using the disclosing solutions. The plaque will be disclosed already. So once the plaque is disclosed, even though it is me or you or anybody else, they will all see the stain. So there is no chance or no error of subjectivity in O'Leary plaque index, or it is very, very minimal. So O'Leary plaque record was actually developed and in this situation we also record the plaque on 4 surfaces, which is mesial, distal, facial and lingual, same as the other plaque just now, other plaque index like Sillness and Low plaque index. So first thing is the initial appointment, suitable disclosing solutions. There are a lot of disclosing solutions like Bismarck Brown, it can be two-tone dye, it can be normal disclosing tablets or anything. You will have to ask the patient to either you have to apply it or you ask the patient to chew the tablet and spread nicely all the disclosing tablet onto all the surfaces of the teeth. So once the patient has gently rinsed it, then using the explorer of the tip of the probe, examine each stained surface for any soft accumulations at the genitogingival junction, and the plaque accumulations can be recorded. So since it is already disclosed, it will be much easier to record, and if at all there is plaque, you put a positive sign if there is, or you put a score of 1. If there is no plaque, you give a score of 0. It depends, you can give positive and negatives, you can also give 0 or 1s. Ultimately, the calculation will be the same. So for O'Leary plaque index, you can see here in this picture, the disclosing solution has been applied and you can see this is a two-tone dye where a plaque is actually disclosed in 2 types here, right? The mature plaque and the immature plaque can also be disclosed in different colors. Now, depending upon the score can be given, whether you don't score how much of plaque it is. In the O'Leary plaque index, it is a dichotomous index. Dichotomous meaning it is only present or absent. You don't grade it, whether how much it is very less or moderate or a lot and all. You don't grade accordingly. You just, if it is present, you give a sign of positive or give a score of 1. If it is absent, put 0 or put minus sign. So accordingly, once you can see in this example here, all the positives indicate where there is plaque present, and the other areas which there is no sign, that means there is no plaque. So ultimately, to calculate the plaque score, number of sites with the plaque divided by the number of sites evaluated has to be taken into account. The number of sites evaluated will be the same, that is always constant, because each tooth is 4 surfaces times the number of teeth present. Okay, so the number of teeth present times 4 will be the constant denominator times 100. This will give you how much is the percentage of plaque score. Doctor, you may ask me, doctor, this takes a lot of clinical time for us. Why we should evaluate all these things, right? See, plaque score is a very, very important thing to be established, because that gives a direct clinical picture of how good the patient is able to maintain, how compliant is the patient. For example, the patient comes to you today, you do a lot of good job or the clinical scaling or root debridement or whatever procedure, and the patient goes back and doesn't even maintain anything. Do you think the outcome will be good? No, the outcome not only depends upon what the treatment done by the clinician, the outcome also depends on how the patient actually maintains his oral hygiene. Especially in periodontal diseases, patient role has got a lot of weightage. So it is very important to get patient's motivation and also make sure the patient becomes compliant eventually and gives this. And if at all we get these values, for example, first time when the patient sees you, if you say your plaque score is actually today is 70%, then the patient would understand, oh, my score is higher. But if you go and you review the patient, recall the patient in another appointment, and you see again after you give the OHI, then if you say the plaque score today is only 30%, the patient gets motivated. Oh yeah, my score has gone increased, is better. Or they can actually perceive what we are trying to say, that their maintenance is good or bad. But if there is no scoring, they don't relate to what we are trying to say. So it is always important that we always try to give them a scoring. Now let us see how to estimate a full mark bleeding score in a patient. In order to rule out the presence of health and gingivitis, or the presence of localized gingivitis or generalized gingivitis, we need to have the percentage of bleeding present in the patient, right? If there is bleeding present in more than 10%, bleeding is present in a patient, we say it is a gingivitis. If the bleeding score is less than 10%, we say it is a healthy patient. Okay, so accordingly, and if the bleeding score is more than 30%, then we say it is generalized gingivitis as per the new classification of periodontal diseases. Now accordingly, we need to have a total bleeding score percentage. Just like how we have arrived at percentage of plaque score, in order to arrive at percentage of bleeding score, we just record dichotomous index only, which is if the bleeding is present upon probing, you give a positive score or you give a score of 1. If the bleeding is absent, you give a negative or you give a blank, you just keep it blank, or you give a score of 0. Now, how to elicit the bleeding, how to do the probing is basically you use the periodontal probe, either WHO probe or Williams probe, and then you start the most distalmost part of the first quadrant and you start putting the probe parallel to the long axis of the tooth within 1 mm of the sulcus depth, and you run the probe along all the surfaces. Once you reach the other quadrant, distal aspect, then you go palatally and you reach until the first initial point. So you can wait until 30 seconds in order to elicit the bleeding after probing. So for each tooth surface, for each tooth you need to record the bleeding on 4 surfaces, which are buccal, lingual, mesial and distal. Once you finish recording on all the 4 surfaces, then the plaque score, the bleeding score can be estimated. As you can see in the given picture, it shows how the bleeding is actually, the probe is actually being passed within the 1 mm of the sulcus. If you see the within 1 mm of the sulcus, actually the probe is being carried into the all the tooth surfaces along the margin. You can also observe the 1 mm, how here the probe is inserted and it is running of the probe. It is called as running of the probe. So once you start eliciting the bleeding, once the bleeding comes out, then you are recording the bleeding score. You can record the bleeding score using this chart, and you just give a positive wherever there is bleeding present and negative or no shading wherever there is a no bleeding present. Okay, alternatively you can also use 0 and 1. Okay, so for the calculation, similarly like how you have used for the plaque score, you just use the number of bleeding sites present by sites evaluated, which is 4 into number of teeth present in the patient times 100. So that gives you the percentage of bleeding score in the patient. So in this patient, depending upon the sites that are shaded and present bleeding, so there are 57% of bleeding. So 57% bleeding means, is it a gingivitis generalized or localized? Definitely more than 30% is considered as generalized gingivitis. So accordingly, it comes under generalized gingivitis. An important aspect of this particular bleeding point index is actually bleeding is actually in this index. It is designed to demonstrate gingival inflammation characterized by bleeding, but not by the presence of plaque. Whether the plaque is present or not is not the thing, but is not being recorded. But whether there is bleeding due to the inflammation or not, that is being recorded. Again, a goal of 10% or fewer bleeding points is good, but 0 is ideal. As I said, 10% or less is considered as healthy gingiva only. Okay. Now let me explain you another bleeding index which also helps us to assess the severity of bleeding. This is given by Mulliman in 1977, called as papillary bleeding index. For this, bleeding is actually provoked by sweeping the sulcus using a blunt periodontal probe under light finger pressure and from the base of the papilla. So here in this particular Mulliman's bleeding index or papillary bleeding index, the papilla only are probed. No need to run the probe all around. The papilla are being probed from the base of the papilla till the tip of the papilla on the distal aspect and also on the mesial aspect. Then again you can wait for 20 to 30 seconds, and once the quadrant is complete, you can give the score on the four grades of the scoring as follows. The grade could be 0 if there is no bleeding, 1 if there is only one bleeding point that is elicited or that is present, and 2 if there are many isolated bleeding points noted, or a small area of bleeding is present, then you give a score of 2. 3 is interdental triangle is filled with blood after probing, and 4 is a profuse bleeding that is present, which even can spread to the marginal gingiva. That can be considered as a grade 4 or score 4 bleeding in this Mullivan bleeding index. Let me show you some pictures that can help you understand in a better way the scoring index. As illustrated in the following pictures, you can actually observe the bleeding score in the following pictures. Grade 1 bleeding, you can see a small pinpoint bleeding here is considered as a grade 1 bleeding. Even this one can be considered as a grade 1 bleeding. Okay, so grade 2 bleeding, if there is a line bleeding like this, is considered as a grade 2 bleeding, or if there is a bleeding in the papillary area that is spreading, also is grade 2. Grade 3 bleeding is where the interdental embrasure space or the interdental triangle is actually filled with the blood. It's considered as, or it is started and it is spreading to the marginal area, is also considered as the grade 3 bleeding. And this one is considered as a profuse bleeding, which is categorized as grade 4. Another important parameter to be assessed in order to estimate the oral hygiene status of the patient is the presence of calculus. So as we all know, the calculus can be supragingival or it can be subgingival calculus, and so detection of the calculus is usually based upon visual perception. You can see the calculus, or you can also use your tactile perception with an explorer or a probe, and you can actually pass through the gingival area and then see whether if there is any presence of calculus, the roughened palpation, the roughened sensation which you feel while you are passing the probe, that also can indicate the presence of calculus. Sometimes if at all, you can also use a warm air to deflect. The deflection of the air where it opens up the gingival space can also lead to visualization of, if the gingiva is dried, not in the moist environment, but if at all gingiva is dried, you can easily make out the presence of calculus clinically. Let us look into how to estimate the oral hygiene on the basis of the calculus present in the patient. So based on the oral hygiene index, which is actually given by Green and Vermillion in 1960, they divide the whole mouth into 6 segments. Okay, like you see how we divide in BP score, we divide actually the areas into 6 segments like this: the posterior, right posterior, and the upper anterior, and the upper left posterior. Similarly, lower left posterior, lower anterior, and lower right posterior. So once the teeth are divided into the segments like here, as mentioned here, now only the rules for this index is only the fully erupted permanent teeth are to be scored, and third molars are usually not included. So the buccal and the lingual calculus scores are both taken on the tooth segment, and having the greatest surface area covered by supra or subgingival calculus is to be accountable. Now, to score calculus based upon the oral hygiene index criteria, there are 3 scoring systems, that is 0, 1, 2 or 3. As it is seen in this picture, 0 is there is absolutely no calculus present on the tooth, and 1 means there is only supragingival calculus, but not even covering or less than the 1/3 of the exposed tooth surface. It is only less than 1/3 or less than or equal to 1/3 of the tooth surface is covered with the supragingival calculus. Now, score 2 is considered whenever the supragingival calculus is actually covering more than 1/3 but less than 2/3 of the tooth surface. Also, if at all there is any flex of subgingival calculus, you see there is flex of subgingival calculus, then also you can also consider it as a score of 2. Score 3 is given whenever there is supragingival calculus that covers more than the 2/3 of the surface of the tooth, or also if there is a continuous heavy band of subgingival calculus, then also it is considered as score 3. So accordingly, you have to actually score all the teeth present in the patient's mouth. And in OHI simplified index, you can score only the index teeth. Okay, you can do it either oral hygiene index for full mouth or oral hygiene index for the simplified. Simplified means you don't really have to check for all the teeth, you just check for only few index teeth. Now, the actual oral hygiene index has got DI, which is debris index, and CI, which is the calculus index. They are the two components of the oral hygiene index. Now, the actual oral hygiene is given based upon summation of DI plus CI. So, but for calculus, since we are interested only for the calculus component today, I am teaching you only the calculus scoring, how to give based on the scoring criteria, and accordingly you can consider the patient oral hygiene as good, fair or poor. Once you sum up and you divide by the number of teeth surface, the number of teeth present in the patient, then you will give a score. If at all the score is below 0.6, it is good, 0.7 to 1.8 is fair, and poor if it is 1.9 to 3. So accordingly you can also give your calculus scoring index. You can also score based upon the oral hygiene scoring criteria if you are also including the debris component. Some of the pictures that indicating the presence of supragingival calculus, as you can see here, this particular picture indicates the presence of a band of calculus here supragingivally, right? So definitely this will be, this is actually, if you see the scoring here, this is more than 1/3 but less than 2/3 of the tooth surface, isn't it? So it could be a score of 2. So similarly, if there is a band of subgingival calculus like this, probably if it is a recession present, then subgingival also can be exposed to supragingival calculus. You can give a score of 3 if it is on the subgingival area. Now here also, if it is only at the less than 1/3 of the tooth surface, the score can be 1. Okay. Now, since we have completed estimating the oral hygiene status of the patient, we have completed examination of gingiva, we have completed how to assess and examine the mucogingival problems in the patient, and how to score the oral hygiene assessment or the oral hygiene maintenance of the patient, how to estimate, also has been completed. Now we are coming to the most important aspect, that is screening tool, which is BPE. So basic periodontal examination. So even in the END, once you finish the intraoral examination and oral hygiene status, the most important thing you look into it is the basic periodontal examination. So let me go in detail about how to exactly do the basic periodontal examination with some video links as well. Before we start into discussing about the basic periodontal examination, it is very, very important to understand the probes and identifying the different kinds of probes, especially that are available in your clinics. Okay, so there are 3 types of probes basically. One is this is called as a WHO probe. The first one is a WHO probe. The second one, this is the Williams probe, and the third one is the UNC probe. Please observe carefully the differences between each of these probes. WHO probe has got actually a ball at the end, right, and has got 2 color bands. First color band extends from 3.5 to 5.5. Second color band extends from 8.5 to 11.5. This probe is also called as CPITN-E probe, okay, or CPITN-C probe, okay. Now, Williams probe has got 10 markings, but marking 4 and 6 are actually missing. This is called as UNC probe. This UNC probe has got actually 3 color codings and a total of 15 markings are present. At each color band, if you see, 4 and 5 is the first color band, and the lower border and the upper border are 9 and 10 for the second color band, and 14 and 15 are the third color band. Okay, so these color codings of the color bands are given in order to help in easy visualization or easy estimation of the probing pocket depth. If there is no color coding, you have to keep, for example, if you probe into the patient's gingiva or the sulcus, you need to go on counting 1, 2, 3 and so on until you are not sure what is you measure and the calibration at which the gingiva is to estimate the probing pocket depth. So if at all there is a color coding, you know it's the first color coding, so it's above it, so it is 6. You can roughly estimate also. I mean, you can accurately estimate also. So this gives you an easy assessment of the pocket depth. So that's why the color codings are actually helpful. Now let me explain you how to exactly record the basic periodontal examination. This has been already taught to you probably in year 3 already, and you have been I hope you all had enough practice on doing basic periodontal examination. If not, some of you have questioned and asked us, so we are covering under this particular topic. For basic periodontal examination, the most important thing you need to have is to selection of the probe. You have to select the WHO probe. There are two types of WHO probe, if you call CPITN-C and CPITN-E probe. CPITN-E has only one color band, which is extending from 3.5 to 5.5. There is no second band. Okay. CPITN C band has got two double bands. Just now I showed you in the previous slide. Okay, so we select the CPITN or WHO probe, which has got the ball at the end, and this ball has got 0.5 mm diameter. So for this also, the dentition is divided, upper arch and lower arch are actually divided into total 3 plus 3, 6 segments or 6 sextants we say. See, first one is the upper right posterior, then upper anterior, then upper left posterior. So sextant 1, 2 and 3. Then this one is a lower left posterior, sextant 4, lower left anterior, lower anterior, which is sextant 5, and then lower right posterior, sextant 6. Now all the teeth in each sextant are examined except for third molars usually are excluded. Now very important point is, for each sextant it must actually contain at least 2 teeth in order to record, but that if at all only one tooth is present in that particular sextant, usually it is included in the adjoining or the next sextant. For example, if a tooth is missing on sextant 1, if only one tooth is present on sextant 1, then the score of that also is included in the sextant 2, rather instead of recording only one tooth there. This is one of the important rules to be followed. Now you have to select the WHO probe as measured, and the light probing force of 20 to 25 grams or 0.75 Newton can be used. Now I know most of you have a doubt how to actually measure 0.75 Newton when you are actually probing. It is not possible, but what you can do is you can use your probe and you can actually try to apply a little pressure on your fingernail. If the probe just blanches your fingernail, that is the actual pressure that is enough or adequate enough to actually probe the gingiva. All right, you no need to really apply so much of pressure and create a pocket. Okay, so the probe should be walked around the sulcus or pockets in each sextant, and the highest score has to be recorded. So walking of the probe and probing technique, I will actually also have a link which I will be posted to you in the video. You can see how to actually probe the pocket depths. Okay, now the walking around the probe is different from running of the probe. Running of the probe, just now I have explained you when we are doing the bleeding percentage of bleeding score. You just start 1 mm into the probe, into the sulcus, and then you run the probe along. That is running of the probe. For walking, you go until the base of the pocket and slightly come down, and in 1 millimeter increments you go on probing on all the sides. Okay, so that is what walking of the probe is. Now, as soon as a code 4 is identified as sextant, the clinician may directly move on to the next sextant. This I will explain how we are going to do based on our scoring criteria in the next slide. This is our scoring criteria for basic periodontal examination, as you all know. This scoring criteria is given even in your END form, so you no need to actually memorize it. Only important thing is if the score 0 is absolutely healthy, no, not even bleeding, and all the black bands are seen. Score 1 is there could be slight bleeding on probing or bleeding on probing present, but black bands are all seen and there is no calculus or no overhang margins. So score 2 is given even though there is bleeding, but there is a plaque retentive factor, or there is supragingival calculus or a subgingival calculus, then and the black bands are still visible, then you give a score of 2. That means the bleeding is score 1, then calculus or the overhang margins is a higher score. Okay, so that goes a score of 2. But as long as the black bands are completely visible outside to you. If the black bands are partially submerged into the gingiva, you can't see whole band. You can see only half a band. Once you're seeing only half of a band, then you give directly a score of 3, even though there is bleeding, even though there is calculus. You should always give a highest score for the sextant. Okay, remember to always note the point that whenever you are probing all the 6 teeth in a sextant, once you get the highest score, for example, you get a score of 4, then there is nothing beyond 4, right? The highest score has to be recorded in this particular sextant. For example, as you see in this here, table here. So sextant 1 has got already 4. That means out of the 6 teeth, if at least one tooth got a score of 4, that is enough. You just have to put always the highest score in the sextant. The other teeth may have 1, the other teeth may have 0, the other teeth may have 2 in that particular sextant. But still, the highest score has to be always recorded. That is most important point to be noted. So if at all you are getting the highest score 4 anywhere, you can skip probing other teeth and quickly go to the next sextant also. So important point is star or asterisk indicates presence of furcation involvement. So presence of furcation involvement does not stand by itself alone as a scoring, but it has to go with the scoring of the particular sextant. For example, if there is a partial visibility of the band and also there is a furcation involvement, then you give a score of 3 asterisk. Okay, or it could be a 4 asterisk if the black band is completely submerged. That means the pocket depth is more than 5.5 mm. See, why always in the BPE score, why there is only 3.5 to 5.5 mm the black band? It is because until 3 mm, 0 to 3 mm is a normal sulcus depth in healthy patients. Okay, it has to be noted 0 to 3 mm is a normal healthy sulcus. So if a pocket starts, anything above 3 is considered a pocket, right? So more than 3 could be 3.5, 4, 4.5 or 5, until which we can consider it as a pocket or shallow pocket. That means the periodontitis is just starting up. More than 5.5, the probing depth has reached means there is a deeper probing depth already. That means the periodontal disease is getting advanced. That's why the score has been given as 4. Okay, so this is a very important point to be remember. Indicating a pocket of 6 mm or more indicates a pocket of 4 to 5 mm or more. So don't just write what is the score. You should understand what does the score 4 means. What does the score 3 means? Score 3 doesn't mean that there is partial submerged black band. Partially the black band is submerged, so you give a score of 3. But score 3 infers or you interpret the score 3 as a presence of pocket more than 3 mm or 4 to 5 mm. A pocket could be present. If it crosses 5.5 mm, that means the total band also is inside, then the scoring can be, or the pocket can be more than 5.5 mm. It could be 6 mm or a more anything, right? So that is one of the important point to be noted. Now, one important aspect also to be noted, can we measure the exact pocket depth using WHO probe? Not actually. With the WHO probe, we can actually screen only whether there is a presence of a deep pocket or a shallow pocket, or if there is a pocket present or not. But you can't accurately measure whether there is a 7 mm pocket, whether there is a 8 mm pocket, whether there is a 3 mm or 4 mm pocket, whichever it is. To measure the pocket, you need to select a Williams periodontal probe or a UNC probe, right? You can't use WHO probe to measure, but to screen for periodontal BPE examination, you can happily use a WHO probe. This WHO probe or the screening tool for BPE is only to rule out whether the patient has got gingivitis or periodontitis. It doesn't really help to say how much disease the patient has or how depth of the pocket the patient has. It helps to rule out only if the score 4 is present, that means the patient has, or 3 or 4 is present, that means there is initiation of periodontal disease, right? That much is indicated. I understand most of you have been recording the BPE scores in your clinical practice. But are you all following up with what to be done further after recording the BPE scores? What is the significance of recording the BPE scores? Not only to rule out whether there is periodontitis or not, but for the patients who have got a score of 0, 1 or 2, the BPE should be recorded at least once every year. That is the actual indication, because anytime if at all the BPE indicates how healthy the periodontium is, whether there is any periodontitis or whether there is bleeding present, whether there is healthy or calculus started or anything, it can indicate to you, right? So once it is done every year, it can also see if at all any initial signs of periodontitis, it can be easily captured, and accordingly treatment can be done. If at all the patients have a BP codes of 3 or 4, in such situation, a more detailed periodontal charting has to be done. If a patient has got a code of 3, if at all there is code 3, recording full pocket depths, full probing, 6-site probing pocket depths have to be recorded in all the sextants or in the sextants where there is a code of 3. I mean, where for example, if at all the BP score is like this. Imagine there is a BP score of, let's say 3 here, 1 here, 0 here, then 3 here, 2 here and 1 here. Now, in this situation, now in which sextant then we have to record the full mouth charting, full mouth 6-point probing pocket depth have to be recorded in this 4th sextant and the 1st sextant because there is a score of 3. Okay, in addition to scoring in other teeth, right? But whereas whenever there is a code 4, if there is a code 4 in any sextant, then record a full mouth 6-point charting throughout the entire dentition. That is what is the very, very important indication about the PPE scoring. So only wherever in this sextant you have to, if at all there is a, I repeat again, if at all a score of 3 is present, in that case you have to only record 6-point charting only in this particular sextant. Okay, or and in this particular sextant. But if at all instead of 1 here, if there is a score of 4, right, if there is a score of 4, right, then it is important that you have to record a full mouth periodontal charting. Okay, because score of 4 indicates advanced periodontitis, so it is important to not to miss any site or any tooth with pocket depth. Now, what do you infer the treatment needs as per the BP score? Based upon our BP score, if there is one, what you will do, it's only bleeding that is present. There is not even calculus. There is not even calculus, only bleeding is present means there is only plaque, right? So only plaque the patient can get rid of. You need not really do scaling to take out the plaque. Plaque, everybody, if you brush the plaque can go out, right? Can be removed, can be eliminated. So you can advise oral hygiene instructions, maybe interdental cleaning, maybe oral interdental cleansing aids and other brushing technique and everything, and a proper oral hygiene devices and all in order to eliminate the or reduce the plaque, and regular care has to be maintained. If a score of 2 is there, that means there is some plaque retentive factor. Even calculus itself is a plaque retentive factor. So either it could be overhang, it could be a calculus that is present, or supra or subgingival calculus. Then it requires intervention. You require to do scaling and polishing. Okay. If a score of 3 is present, that means there is a pocket depth of at least 4 to 5 in millimeters, right? In such situations, a root debridement, apart from scaling and polishing, a root debridement also needs to be done. Again, if a score of 4 is present, also a more complex treatment also may be indicated, not only root debridement, but some other periodontal surgical procedures or referral to the periodontal specialist may be required. What is asterisk? Again, for asterisk, that means if there is a furcation involvement also, it indicates or it suggests a need for more complex treatment or referral to the specialist. So based upon BPE, you are getting a lot of information about the patient oral periodontal status. What are the things you can get? You understand how good oral hygiene also roughly, because if there is 2, that means there is calculus. If there is no 2, there is no calculus, right? You see whether there is bleeding or not. You see whether the patient is healthy or not, 0, 1, 2. Now, you also see how severe the periodontal disease is. If it is only 3 scoring, it is initial periodontal disease only. If it is a score 4 means it is probably an advanced cases of periodontitis or a deeper probing depths are present. It also indicates which sextant the sites you need to focus on. If there is score 4 in all the area, that definitely it is a generalized periodontitis. But if it is only one sextant, you have got a score of 4, that means only there could be pockets, or there could be a local factor like food impaction or an occlusal factor that is causing a pocket on that area. So that has to be also verified. And also you can also understand what treatment have to be given if there is a score 1, 2, 3 and 4 or asterisk accordingly. right? So as a general rule, also one more important thing is, if at all radiographs are required or not also to assess the bone loss, you can also try to estimate, or you can also assess based upon the BPE score. If at all, as a general rule, to assess alveolar bone levels should be obtained for teeth or sextants where the BPE scores of 3 or 4. But usually in our practice in Masa, we all advocate to advise radiographs, I mean panoramic radiographs only if at all a score of 4 is present, then we can in more than one or in more than 2 or 3 sextants, then we advise for a panoramic radiograph. If not, probably IOPA should be fine, because BPE score of 3, if at all it is present, it can also be due to a false pocket, right? It could be due to inflammation. If there is gingival inflammation also present and swelling of gingiva slightly seen, then the size of the gingiva slightly swollen or enlarged, then when you probe, it can show a deeper pocket, pseudo pocket, right? In such situations, if there is only 3, sometimes we advise you to do the treatment of scaling and review the patient again in 2 weeks of time and recheck the BPE score. If still the pockets are seen or measured as more than 4 mm or 5 mm, in that case, accordingly we investigate, or accordingly we do the treatment. I hope it is clear. Hence, today we have actually covered so far how to actually take a brief important points of taking a patient case history have been covered. Also, we have actually covered about examination, intraoral examination details of gingival examination, mucogingival problems, how to actually assess them. Since gingival examination has already been taught to you, I didn't put any videos on that. But otherwise, from mucogingival examination onwards, there is almost videos available for every particular assessment, so which you can actually go through the links as well. Oral hygiene assessment, we have seen how to assess plaque score, bleeding score, and calculus index. How to assess how to do the BPE properly, what is the inference, how to get the treatment needs for BPE, everything has been discussed in detail. Now, examination of periodontium itself is a one more big chunk which you are going to do in year 4 for the periodontitis cases, right? I think almost until this part, except mucogingival part, you didn't do in year 3, but oral hygiene assessment to certain extent and BPE has been covered to you in year 3 to certain extent. So details have been now given to you. Examination of periodontium of all the relevant aspects including periodontal charting, including radiographic assessment, it will be covered to you in part 2. Hope, I expect you all can learn better with this blended learning approach. Again, I request you all to kindly cooperate with us in this research aspect of blended learning, and I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thank you so much.